Hello and welcome to the series of lectures as part of the introductory course about the Crusaders and the Holy Land, the story of the Holy War of Europe in the land of Israel. Our story here begins in July 15th, 1099, when Jerusalem, the holy city, was besieged and conquered by people coming from Europe called the Crusaders. The history of the Middle East is about to be changed forever. From that point on, the Crusaders will be part of the history of this land for the next 200 years, slightly less than that. So the Crusader period begins with a war in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, I'm sitting now in Jerusalem, the holy city, which is now the capital of Israel. But 800 years ago, this was the capital of the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. So what is the story of the Crusaders in the Holy Land? But before we delve into the depth of the issue and start to explore the story of the Crusaders in the Holy Land, allow me to elaborate a little bit about the time frame of the Crusader period. To be more specific, there are actually two Crusader periods. The first Crusader kingdom existed between the years 1099 to 1187. The Second Crusader Kingdom existed between the year 1192 to 1291. So basically, the First Crusader Kingdom existed in the 12th century, while the Second Crusader Kingdom existed in the 13th century. During the First Crusader Kingdom, the Crusaders controlled the entire Holy Land, and even beyond the borders of the Holy Land. During the Second Crusader Kingdom, things are a bit more complicated. Along with the Crusaders, who controlled part of the country, there were other armies and other political entities controlling other parts of the country. And these were the Muslims. The Ayyubid Muslims, named after the great leader of the Muslims at the time, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin. And later, from 1260, these were the Mamluks, a different regime. We'll get to that in due course. Meanwhile, it's important to understand the division between the First and the Second Crusader periods. Who were the Crusaders? Where did they come from? Well, generally speaking, Crusaders are the people who came to the Holy Land in the 12th century, actually the end of the 11th century at 1099, from Europe. To be more precise, mostly from Western Europe. Places like Germany, Belgium, France, England, and so on and so forth. This would be the first time in the history of this country that the ruling regime would be Western European. So they were Europeans and they were Catholics. Unlike the local Christians who were not Catholics, they were Eastern denominations, such as the Greek Orthodox, the Syriacs, also known as Arameans today, the Copts from Egypt, and so on and so forth. These people, the Crusaders that is, are Europeans and they're Catholics. What is the origin of the term Crusader? Where does it come from? Well, obviously, it comes from the word cross. But what is the connection between the two? Well, the aim of the Crusaders was a religious aim. At least the major focal point in their mind was that they were coming to release the Holy Land from the Muslim occupation. So the cross was the symbol. Practically, what they did is that each Crusader soldier actually attached the symbol of the cross to his attire, to his clothes. Hence, they came to be known as Crusaders. Mind you, many of them considered themselves to be pilgrims. They didn't call themselves Crusaders up to a slightly later time. So the goal of the Crusaders coming from Europe was to release the Holy Sepulchre Church and the Holy Land in general from the Muslim occupation. May I remind you that Christianity ruled the Holy Land since the 4th century, the time of Constantine the Great, the beginning of Byzantium, of the Christian Roman Empire, until the 7th century, when Jerusalem and the Holy Land were conquered by the Muslims. Since the 7th century, to be more precise, since the year 638 AD, this country is under Muslim control until the coming of the Crusaders in 1099. So for the Crusaders, they are the redeemers. They're going to bring back the true, faithful Christian regime to the Holy Land after hundreds of years of Muslim control. So now that we've understood the term Crusaders, let me explain the term crusade. A crusade is generally a military campaign motivated by religious aspirations. But wait a second, that may be also true for the story of the Europeans who went to America in the 15th and 16th centuries, and they also had some religious ideology. And it is actually true. Some scholars would call the invasion of Europe to America in the 15th and 16th centuries a crusade, in a sense. So let me limit our topic. We are not concerned with such crusades. We're focusing on the original crusades, meaning the military campaigns to the Holy Land, aiming at releasing and freeing the Holy Land from the Muslim occupation. That's the main idea behind the crusades. And they came to the Middle East from Europe. There weren't just one or two crusades, there were actually around 9 of them. Different scholars have different numbers, but I think 9 crusades is probably accurate. Many of the crusades have actually failed. They never achieved their goal, and we will see that shortly. And the first one, as we said earlier, began in 1096. They left Europe in 1096 until they reached the Holy Land in 1099. So it's a 3-year journey to the Holy Land. When they arrived in the Holy Land, the Crusaders, these Europeans, established an independent kingdom in the Holy Land. It's very important to understand that we're not talking about a branch of any monarchy, of any realm in Europe. The Crusaders were totally independent. They had their own king, their own establishment, their own administration, their own army, their own politics. Of course, they needed the help of Europe from time to time. So they were dependent in that sense, in the help of their brothers in Europe. But they were an independent state established in the Holy Land. The capital of the Crusaders was in the First Crusader Kingdom in Jerusalem, and in the Second Crusader Kingdom, when the Crusaders were unable to conquer Jerusalem, their capital was, in fact, in Akko, or Acre, which is an important coastal plain city, a center of naval commerce in the Holy Land. And finally, the Crusades established more than one kingdom, more than one political entity in our region. Yes, the most important one was the one established around Jerusalem in the Holy Land. But there was another Crusader kingdom, or a principality, that is, an entity led by a prince in Antioch. Antioch is in the southern area of present-day Turkey. In Edessa, Urfa, another city in Turkey. In Tripoli, modern-day Lebanon. In Cyprus, and other places too. But as we said, Jerusalem and the Holy Land are the focal point of everything going around here during the Crusader period. Now the question is, what was so unique about the Crusades in the Holy Land? Why are we focusing on this magnificent topic? What is so special about the Crusades? Well, judging by the years or the length of the period, it is not very impressive. You'd agree with that. We're talking about around 200 years in total. It's all very impressive when we compare it to 1,300 years of Muslim regime, about 1,000 years of Jewish presence in the First and Second Temples period, the Roman periods, the Byzantine periods. They're longer than the Crusades. So what's so special about the Crusades, therefore? Well, there are several issues we must address in this respect. Firstly, it is one of the periods in history that the Holy Land is controlled by Christians. Christians controlled the Holy Land in the Byzantine era. That's between the 4th century and the 7th century. Well, that was the first period. Then the Crusades for 200 years. And then the next time will be almost 1,000 years later under the British rule in the 20th century, beginning in 1917. So along the history of the Holy Land, the Crusader period is significant, being one of the most important periods in which Christianity was dominant in the Holy Land. The second thing is that there's a Crusader state, a Crusader kingdom in the Holy Land. It is an independent state, as I said earlier. Why is that interesting? Well, firstly, we must realize that during most of its history, the Holy Land is almost never an independent entity. Let me explain. Let's take a look back in time. Go back into the first millennium BC, okay? 1,000 years BC. There's a state established by David and Solomon and the later kings of Judah. It is the kingdom of David and Solomon and later Judah. They were independent. They had their kings. They had their army. They had political issues that were unique to them. And then it ended with the Assyrians' invasion, and then the Babylonian invasion, and then the destruction of the first temple. So that was the end of the independent state of the Jews. Then came the Persians. For the Persians, the land of Israel, the Holy Land, is not an independent entity. It is part of a vast empire. Then come the Hellenistic regime coming from Macedonia, from northern Greece today. They also were an empire, and we were a tiny piece, a tiny part of that empire. No independent state. Then came the Hasmoneans. The Hasmoneans were Jews who rebelled against the Macedonians and succeeded in establishing an independent state in the Holy Land. So during the Hasmonean period, it's the second time we have an independent state in the Holy Land. Moving on in time, come the Romans in 63 BCE, and they crush the Hasmonean entity, basically leaving us under the Roman army's boot, under the Roman regime. So no more independence. No more independent state here. And that is also true after the destruction of the Second Temple. In the Byzantine era, under the Muslim rule, there is no independent state in this region. We are part of huge empires. We are districts, little faction inside the huge empires, until the Crusaders come. And when the Crusaders time, it's the third time an independent state is established in the Holy Land. Once the Crusaders are demolished by the Muslims and kicked out in 1291, the end of the Crusader era, the Muslims return. And under the Muslims, again, we are part of the Ayyubid Empire, Mameluke Empire, Turkish Empire. We are never independent here. There's no independent state here. Under the British regime, we're under a mandate, meaning the British got the authority to control the land, but there's no independent state here in the 20th century. So the fourth time we have an independent state in this area is only in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel. So only 4 times in the history of this land there is an independent state, not for too long, and the Crusader period is one of these times. And when we consider that, let's consider the status of Jerusalem. That's also unique in the Crusader period. Jerusalem sometimes is a capital of a state in this country. Think about the First Temple period. Jerusalem is the capital of the kings of Judah. Think about the Hasmonean period. Jerusalem is the capital of the Hasmoneans. Think about the Crusaders. Jerusalem is the capital of the Crusaders in the First Crusader kingdom. And then, finally, in the 20th century, Jerusalem is the capital of the State of Israel since 1948, 1949. Only 4 times in its history, Jerusalem is a capital of a state, and the Crusader period is one of these occasions. And beyond these considerations, bear in mind the variety of important and relatively well-preserved remains of Crusader archaeology all over the country. There are Crusader cities buried under some of the ancient cities of this country. Think about Jerusalem. So parts of the Crusader city of Jerusalem were excavated and can be seen today, along with Akko, the other Crusader capital, which is being excavated as we speak, and parts of the city can be now seen by visitors. Churches were built, such as, of course, the Holy Sepulchre Church and many, many other churches, bigger or smaller. Fortresses were built. Some of them are unique in the entire world. Think about the fortress of Safed, Tzfat, in the north part of Israel, which was the biggest Crusader fortress in the world. Hospitals were built in Jerusalem, next to the Holy Sepulchre Church. There was a hospital built by the Crusaders. Bridges, flour mills, you name it. It's here all over the country. So the Crusader entity helped shaping our physical memories of the antiquities of the Holy Land.